The 1800s were a nightmare for slaves in the South of the United States. Most African Americans were forced to slave away in large plantations all day, planting and harvesting crops to make their white owners wealthy. The demand for slaves increased as tobacco plantations grew more popular and cotton gins were invented. Although the U.S. seemed a heartless country during this time, there were actually many people fighting to give slaves a chance at a real life. Both black and white worked together to accomplish this goal during the 1830s and the 1860s. Some of the most influential abolitionists of that time were, in fact, black. Nathaniel Turner, Harriet Tubman, David Ruggles, and Frederick Douglass, through the use of physical resistance, activism, and political resistance, helped put an end to the oppressing time. Throughout the history of slavery, many slaves tried to revolt and gain their freedom through violence. Most of their methods did not work, though, because slave owners would stop them before they could really get going.
Nathaniel Turner was responsible for one of the most violent rebellions regarding slavery. This uprising took place in Southampton, Virginia on August 1831. Turner managed to gather a group of followers and successfully raided the homes of white families, killing about 60 people, including women and children.
Turner himself killed a woman, saying of it,
"On my approach she fled, but soon was overtaken, and after repeated fatal blows with the sword, I killed her by a blow to the head with a fence rail."
According to this man, he was following God's command. Although Turner's goal was met, his action didn't count for anything because the police came and stopped it, and Turner was later lynched. However, the rebellion did help to spread fear among the whites, because people came to realize that if nothing was done to help stop slavery, another uprising was inevitable. Since physical resistance wasn't helpful in abolishing slavery, it became obvious that another way to be free needed to come about, so that's when activism started.
Probably the most widely known mode of escaping for slaves was the Underground Railroad. Unlike the name describes, it was not actually an underground railroad. It was a group of abolitionists that made transportation and shelter available for escaping slaves to use. This cause helped between 30,000 and 100,000 slaves to escape to freedom. Many abolitionists, such as Harriet Tubman and David Ruggles, actually led the slaves to freedom.
Harriet Tubman was born a slave and escaped at the age of 29 by following the North Star all the way to Pennsylvania, a free state. She joined the Underground Railroad a few years later and helped over 100 slaves escape to their freedom, making over 20 trips back and forth across the country. None of the slaves she helped to run away were ever caught again, and they all remained free. William Still, a man who recorded what had happened in the Underground Railroad, said of her, "A woman of no pretension, indeed, a more ordinary specimen of humanity could ever hardly be found among the most unfortunate-looking farmhands of the South. Yet, in point of courage, shrewdness, and disinterested exertion to rescue her fellow men, she was without her equal." Not only did she help hundreds of slaves to freedom, she also worked with the Union Army during the Civil War as a cook, spy, and nurse. She once helped conduct a raid to the enemy's country, bringing back nearly 800 slaves and giving them freedom. A man of similar bravery and commitment was David Ruggles. David Ruggles was the leading and probably the most hated abolitionist in New York. Ruggles was born free in Norwich, Connecticut in 1810. In 1835, Ruggles, another young activist, founded the New York Committee of Vigilance. The committee protected runaway slaves, confronted the slave catchers, and provided recaptured slaves with lawyers with whom they could go to court. He published articles and pamphlets, in which one of them he wrote, "In our cause, mere words are nothing. Action is everything." He helped hundreds of fugitive slaves travel as an anti-slavery activist and became one of the chief conductors of the Underground Railroad. While being one of the chief conductors, he helped a runaway slave from Maryland survive to later become Frederick Douglass. Because the Underground Railroad and activism were so successful, many former slaves were able to escape and publicize their experiences, furthering white support for anti-slavery. Political resistance was one way that black abolitionists helped to spread their ideas and messages about slavery. Frederick Douglass was the most important example. Born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, he was an abolitionist, writing books and delivering speeches to help free his fellow men. Although he wasn't an activist, Frederick Douglass convinced many others about the cruelty of slavery, and that all means necessary should be taken to stop it, so he was considered the voice for the black abolitionist movement. Frederick Douglass, who was born a slave in Maryland and was separated from his mother at an early age, had many owners and learned to read and write on his own. Finally, at the age of 20, he managed to escape through the Underground Railroad with the help of a black abolitionist, David Ruggles. It was then that he changed his name, publicized what it was like to be a slave, and was hired by the Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society to provide more information and stories. After his moving speeches, he was convinced to write 3 autobiographies, which acquired a lot of fame, but put him in danger of being captured again by slave owners. Because of this, Douglass escaped to England for a few years, to return to New York once again. Upon his arrival, he said,
I was again seized with a feeling of great insecurity and loneliness. I was yet liable to be taken back and subjected to all the tortures of slavery.
Douglass' method to abolish slavery, however, did not stop there. When he returned to New York, he began to write a black anti-slavery newspaper known as the North Star. This newspaper, which motto,
Right is of no sex, truth is of no color. God is the father of us all, and we are all brethren,
helped put forth the ideas of slaves. In addition, Douglass is also remembered for convincing President Abraham Lincoln to allow African Americans to join the Union Army during the Civil War, because this way slaves could escape to their freedom. Thanks to the dedication and hard work of abolitionists all around the country, Abraham Lincoln announced on January 1, 1863, that slavery will no longer be allowed in the United States. This was called the Emancipation Proclamation. Slaves everywhere rejoiced at this revelation, but their problems were far from over. Former slaves would have to work through discrimination and continue to be treated harshly by their white neighbors. Even through this persecution, black Americans fought to have their voices heard and gain the respect that they deserved.